Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, General George, thank you both for being here. I want to follow up on Senator Reid's question about the role of the National Guard in dealing with illegal immigrants. And I'm looking at a memo here from the Executive Secretary at the Department of Defense from the Department of Homeland Security. And one of the things they say in this memo is that they're asking the National Guard to up to 3,500 personnel to support field investigative units for high-priority fugitive cases, joint task force operations for absconder fugitive tracking, surveillance and canvassing missions, data analysis and call center support, and night operations and rural interdiction. That doesn't sound hypothetical to me, Mr. Secretary. That sounds like that is a direct request that has already been made to the Department of Defense, and I assume you might have seen it from the Department of Homeland Security to engage in those operations. It also says that the Army is not going to be, or the Department of Defense is not going to be reimbursed for those operations. So do you know who's going to pay for those and what account from the Department of Defense that those operations would come from?
Senator, I don't know what account sitting here right now, but we can follow up with your office.
Well, I would hope that if first of all, I share Senator Reid's concerns about asking the National Guard to engage in those kinds of operations. As a former governor, I can tell you that I didn't want our National Guard going off to do something when we needed them at home in New Hampshire. But I would also be very concerned about who's paying for those. And the Department of Homeland Security, if they're going to engage in these operations, then they ought to be footing the bill, not asking the Department of Defense and the Army or anybody else in the National Guard to do that. So let me just register my grave concern, Mr. Chairman, about that. I want to go on to another topic at this point, and that is a lot of the discussion so far has been about the changing role of conflict and war. And one of the places where I think we're seeing those operations very dramatically is in the information warfare systems arena. And so I'm concerned about the Army's decision last year to reduce nearly 3,000 Special Operation Forces personnel. Most of those were from Military Information Support Operations, MISO, and this comes at a time when we're looking at expanded operations on the part of Russia, on the part of China, our adversaries. I sit on the Foreign Relations Committee. We had a hearing earlier this year that pointed out that China is spending over $1 billion a year on disinformation operations around the world. And so it feels to me like we're unilaterally disarming in this arena at a time when we should be engaging and thinking about how to do that. So I wonder, General George, from an operational perspective, does SOCOM have the ability to replace those positions, and how are you thinking about information warfare?
First, on the information warfare, Senator, I completely agree with you. I mean, that is something, and I think rather than what we've been talking about looking at specific formations, we're also looking, we have a bunch of specialties that we have had around for 20 or 30 years. And like I think anybody does in the commercial sector, you have to make, you have to adapt and change and make sure that you're doing that. So the cuts were made, and this was, worked with U.S. Army Special Operations Command and SOCOM, were print media, leaflet drops, people that were doing those kinds of things. And I would argue that the world has changed, and what we should be doing, we should be focused on. In the meantime, we have grown cyber capability, and how we're going to do that, through technology, I think is important. And I think the other thing that we've learned is that we're going to have this kind of capability throughout our formation. It's less about headquarters. It's about having capabilities at echelon throughout all of our formations. We're all living, you're not going to give just a certain people a capability because we're all going to have to operate on this very complex battlefield, and that's what we're looking at. So we just had a discussion about this. I'd love to come over and talk to you about this more in detail on what we're looking at and how we're going to embed this across our formation.
I would very much enjoy seeing a plan for how that's going to be done, because I think that's one of the most serious disadvantages we have right now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.